Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm looking across at a man who once licked his elbow just to prove a point. That's right, friends, the former Navy SEAL, Garrett Unkelbach, a man who knows that impossible is an illusion.
It's ridiculous.
It is. I was actually really proud of that one because I was thinking about
You would be proud of that one.
Look, bro, we don't want you doing the intros, okay? It's happened one time on our podcast, and I'll just say we were both glad for normal service to resume. We both have a unique skill set that we bring.
I thought the intro that I did was great.
You know, you were one of the few people that thought that, and I'm glad that you did. Point being, I was thinking about what's impossible, and obviously they say it's impossible for you to lick your elbow. It sounds like the kind of thing that you're like, I dislocated my shoulder when I was a kid just so I could show people that it wasn't impossible. That may or may not have really happened. Anywho, today's episode is about being all in. It's about becoming inevitable, which I am psyched for this episode. And I know you are too, G. When we talk about becoming inevitable, there's so many different stories that you can tell, but like the very first one I thought of, and they're actually making it into a movie that's going to be coming out, I don't know when, but sometime soon, is the story of Rocky Balboa and Sylvester Stallone. If you don't know this story, it is like one of the all-time greats that I would challenge you to look up. I got this story from Forbes.com because they talk about it. So the movie franchise has earned over $1.4 billion with a B at the box office, and we all know it. Like, you know Rocky. If you haven't seen Rocky, it's kind of like, where have you been? Well, the actual origin of the story, Sylvester Stallone was in New York, and he had like somewhat of a breakthrough. He got on like his first show, and he's like, right, I got to move to California to be successful. He moves to California to be successful. It didn't work out so well for him out there. He was so broke at one point, he sold his dog Butt Kiss in front of 7-Eleven for $40 so he could keep eating. So he's like not doing too well here. Sells his dog. He goes one night to see Chuck Wepner fight Muhammad Ali and in a boxing match, and he becomes inspired. Like, there's, depending on where you read, there's various discrepancies about whether or not that's where he got the inspiration from. I'm guessing there was discrepancies because if he says he got it from them, those people would try and be like, hey, you owe us money. But he actually, in the Forbes article I read, he quoted and said that he saw this guy, Chuck Wepner, who was a nobody, knock down the greatest of all time. And he said that was like the moment where he was like, that's what life's about, is being able to take hits, but like get your shot. So he goes back and writes the whole of the Rocky script in 3 days, has this like massive brainwave of inspiration. And he's on an audition one day and realizes he's not going to get the part. He's terrible for it, but he says, hey, I got a script that you guys should read. The producers read it. They love it. Dreams come true, right? I'll offer you $360,000 for the script right now. But by the way, you can't be the lead character like you want to be. And he's sitting there. He says he has no car. He's got $106 in the bank, and he just sold his dog. How many people, if you said, hey, here's $360,000 for something you created in 3 days, would be like, well, I'm not going to be in it, but hey, my problems are over. And he said his exact thought process was, you know what? I've got this poverty thing down. I don't need much to live on. And I've kind of figured it out. I'm not used to the good life. And he said, if I sell this and it does really well, he's like, I'm going to jump off a building if I'm not in it. He said, there's no doubt in my mind. I'm going to be very, very upset. He said, so he just flew by the seat of his pants and said, I've got to try it. I've got to do it. I may be totally wrong, and I'm going to take a lot of people down with me, but I just believe in it. That was exactly what he said to the Forbes people. He knew.
He knew he was supposed to play the part.
He knew he was supposed to play the part. So he ends up getting, finally these guys relent after some back and forth. He gets $1 million to film this thing. That's not a lot of money, even in the 70s, to film a movie. So he was pulling in friends and family to play parts. They shot most of what you see in that movie in one take with handheld cameras. And it's, you know, it goes on. He said that when it auditioned, like everybody they showed it to, it was like, oh man, we love this. So he finally showed it to like 900 industry types. And he said that the reaction was so flat. He said nobody laughed when they were supposed to. Nobody got emotional in the fight scenes or had any sort of feel. And he said he walked out of there going, oh my gosh, this is going to be a failure. And he said when he came out of the theater, like no one said anything to him, but when he came out of the theater, he walked down the steps and he said there was just a large group of those people and they all gave him a standing ovation. He said it was one of the moments of his life that he'll never be able to have again. Wow. It was just incredible. It gives me chills telling the story.
I love that.
It's an incredible story. And like, why are we talking about like being all in? Gee, this is the impossible life, not the...
His life could have been so different.
Oh man, massively
He could have
different.
said, oh yeah, I got my success, wrote a story. He could have been the guy, you know, wrote a great story, right, and then spends the next 20 years trying to write another great script. And he's just another writer in L.A.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But he knew who he was supposed to be. He knew who he was supposed to become. and he knew the inevitability that would be required of him to get there.
Yeah, and I think that this thing, it's funny. I was talking with our friend Nate Burkhalter, Ninja Warrior Nate, who's been on the podcast. And I remember when he came on our podcast, my biggest takeaway from him was just how important it was to be all in. If you go back and listen to that one, he talks about how he left a very secure, like golden handcuff job as an engineer to go off and pursue being a Ninja Warrior, which was not going to pay well and had very little chance of success. And I love that thought process of being like, you know what, there's something here, I'm going to go for it. And so oftentimes we think that we're all in on something, or we get really fired up about something. I think about your dad. So like, if you don't know, if this is your first time listening, welcome. Garrett and I lead in a group of men at our church called Mighty Men. And it's an incredible environment. People who are from the outside of it come in and experience it for the first time. Literally, I feel like every week we have people who have flown in or driven in from somewhere to be part of it because it is a special environment. And you'll see guys that'll come in there and they'll get fired up. And they're like, I'm going to be here forever. And like, that's a very common sentiment. Well, I had that same sentiment when I first came to the environment 4.5 years ago. And your dad is a loving man, a very fair man, and also an authority in that room because he's one of the reasons that room exists. And I said to him, I said, Scott, I'm going to be here forever. And he just looked at me, he's like, we'll see. I was like, really? And he's like, we'll see. He's like, I've heard lots of people say it before. He's like, I'll be here. We'll see if you are. And I was like, I was like, man, that one kind of hits me in the old proverbials. And I just realized, and I thought about it, I was like, you know what? Why sit here and talk about all this stuff? Just do it, and eventually you'll show it out. And there's some more to that thought process that we'll get in later. But I remember it kind of was very deflating, and I realized that he says that to everybody. I didn't take it personally because he explained that to me.
Right.
But there's a lot of truth to that. So oftentimes the way that we look at things and the way that we think, like, yes, I'm all in on something. Like, we have this definition of all in, and we don't have this objectivity or this humility to look at ourselves and be like, are you really all in? Like, where are you getting your definition from? We see this all the time when people go to the gym or when people are trying to get fit or whatever it is. What they'll do, all right, man, I'm going to get fit. It's the new year or whatever the reason is. I don't like the way I look. I'm going to do this. Great. Here's your nutrition plan. Here's your workout plan. Here's how often you have to do it. Here's sleep. Here's all the supplements, all the things. Great. All right, cool. I'm going to go out. And somehow between the time that we get the information from whatever trusted authority to the time that it comes like, hey, I need to go to the gym or it's time to eat or whatever it is, we just have this, I don't really like that. That's not that big a deal. I don't need that supplement. Well, I still got to the gym. I did like 3 sets of 10, even though they said to do 4. I still did 3. That's better than nothing. And we have this like compromised thought process of how we dial it down. And then after 60 days or 30 days or whatever it is, we go look in the mirror, we step on the scale or whatever we're doing to measure success, and we go, man, this guy's just, whatever I got told to do doesn't work. This isn't working for me. Oh, really? So you went away and did 60% of what you were told to do, and then when you didn't get 100% of the results that you expected from who knows where that you got that expectation from, you decided that you were going to quit. And we do this over and over again, not just in fitness, but we'll show up to work, wonder why we're not getting the pay raise whenever we were mailing it in every single Tuesday, or we were the person that had Friday syndrome or Monday syndrome and all this stuff, or we were the guy that like my wife should really understand that, and she should just get me. And that's not that big a deal. That's literally the thought process that is like the antithesis of what we're saying, that it's not that big a deal. So we want to get into what it really means to be all in, what it is to become inevitable. And G, you talk about this as the power of what if, and I love the way you phrase that.
For a lot of people, what if is a negative statement.
Big time.
What if it doesn't work out? What if I lose? What if they don't like me? You can say what if, and insert all kinds of negativity, any creative fear that your brain can come up with. What if is typically in the dark side of your brain.
Yeah.
But you can flip that. What if you use the what if power for all the most positive things, all of the best things that could happen to you? It's like the Mel Fisher story of Today's the Day.
Yes.
Largest sunken treasure ever found. The Spanish ship, oh goodness, starts with an A.
Armada.
Nope.
Oh.
Anyways, the Spanish ship, largest sunken treasure ever found, went out every single day and said, today's the day. Went out with so much hope and went out with so much belief, really saying to his crew, what if we find it today? Wouldn't it be great? And there's going to be a lot of days where you don't find it. There's going to be a lot of days where you don't win, where you don't get the success that you wanted. But you've got to continue to have that what if mindset for the positive instead of the what if mindset for the negative. You got to be the type of person that you can sustain, that you can withstand frustration, negativity, failures, mistakes, and know that you're going to win on the other side. And this comes from, for me, a great quote. It's really going to be kind of the anchor quote for today. We'll reference it many times. This is a quote that really resonates with me. I feel like I've lived a lot of my life this way, and you learn from people who are very successful, who've gone before you. Abraham Lincoln said, "I will prepare and my time will come." And you got to be someone who thinks that way, knowing that you have an appointed time, knowing that it's coming, and that your preparation is what's going to bring it to pass. You can have a time. Maybe God made a time for you. You don't know when it is. It could be tomorrow. It could be 12 years from now. But if you don't prepare, when that time does come, it's going to pass you by. But if you're someone who says, I'm just going to continue, it's like Sylvester Stallone in the Rocky Balboa story. He said, my time is coming.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue to grow. I'm going to continue to prepare and get ready for my moment that's coming. When you live this way, that's when you're inevitable.
Right.
And an inevitability is you can't stop it.
Right.
It's coming, right? It's like death for all of us. It's
Yeah.
inevitable. What if you reaching your purpose, what if you reaching the destiny that God had for you became inevitable? You need to understand, and this is an episode today that I'm passionate about. You need to understand that you can live in a way, that you can think in a way, that your success, that your greatness, that you achieving your destiny can be inevitable for you. If you'll live the right way, if you'll think the right way. And so we're going to break this down today on what you need to base your life on, what you need to think about, how you need to live, what choices you need to make so that you achieving your destiny can be inevitable.
Man, I love that so much, man. So we are literally going to break down the 3 key characteristics of becoming inevitable. We're going to talk about the mindset. We're going to talk about some of the opposites of what that looks like as well. You know, G, when you were talking about that, about becoming inevitable, and I gave that example of the gym, I had this flashback, and we didn't plan this, but it's just, I remember when I was living in England, I was in a band, and I really wanted to make it with my band. And I had such a weak mindset. And we just came off a Strength and Weakness podcast last week that I know a lot of people enjoyed. And my weak mindset, and this is what I think a lot of people can look like whenever they're all in, I was doing everything I knew to do for the band, and I was trying to do all, this and that. And I remember I was talking to this guy who was not a super respectable guy, but he'd had a modicum of success in sales. And I was telling him, like, oh, my band's really good, this and that. This is what I'm all doing. But, like, I was giving him all the excuses of why we hadn't gotten where I wanted us to go yet. And I remember he looked at me, he's like, well, that's all well and good. He's like, but I believe the cream rises to the top. And he said it just very, like, kind of smugly back at me. And I remember it was like a real, like, gut blow, because I had to sit there and be like, I mean, what do you say to that? Right? When you're sitting there and you're like, no, I'm giving everything I got for this and I'm doing all this stuff. Because what he was basically saying was like, well, maybe you guys just aren't good enough. And that was a tough pill to swallow and something that was hard to look at. But, like, in my mind, I'm like, no, I'm all in. And I had all these excuses for why it wasn't working out for me, except for actually taking an objective look at myself and wondering if maybe there was something I wasn't doing right.
When you look at it through that lens,
Yeah.
it really comes down to, like, if we say you felt at your band, in your band at that time, if we say that you felt like you were, not just that you felt you were good, but that you were supposed to be famous, that you were
Right.
supposed to be known.
Correct.
Right. And I think a lot of people get to that place.
Yes.
Where it's like, I'm good and I'm supposed to be famous.
Right.
A lot of people get to that place. And I think the linchpin or the hinge is what you do when you're in that place.
Right.
Some people, a lot of people, when they're in that place, they feel frustrated. They feel entitlement.
Mm-hmm.
They feel like, God isn't helping them out, or the universe isn't giving them a chance, or whatever nonsense way of thinking that you feel like you just haven't gotten your opportunity.
Yeah.
But then there's a small group of people that, again, it's like, I will prepare and my time will come. There's a small group of people that say when they feel like they're supposed to be great, and when they haven't gotten their opportunity, they say, well, I guess I just need to get better.
Yeah. Well, exactly right. And there's a humility that comes with that. Oddly enough, what kept me from getting there, and praise God I did not get there, because I was not in a place where that would have been a blessing to me. We actually had a shot on a national TV show that they had already said, yes, we want you on this national TV show. And I thought we were going to make it. And I remember being on the call with the producer, and they asked us if we did covers. And in my arrogance, I was like, no, we only play our own stuff. Now, how stupid am I at 27 or whatever I was to be saying that? Oh, your own stuff that nobody's heard of. That's smart. Like, look at all your musical heroes. They all started with covers. And my heroes were like Hendrix, Bob Dylan, all those guys, the Beatles. And I was so arrogant, I sailed right past it. And that was ultimately, I believe that was kind of like a big shot for us that we were all excited about that got just after that, they wouldn't take our calls or anything. And how stupid was I?
I think you have to be able to hold two thoughts at the same time. You have to be able to hold one, the thought that like we're supposed to be great.
Right.
You got to be able to
Right.
hold that thought, but you also at the same time have to be able to hold this thought. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought.
Right. Very good.
Which those would seem like they're against each other.
Mm-hmm.
But the thought of I'm not as good as I thought is a humility statement.
Yes.
Which is also a door opener for your growth and your development.
Very much so. Yeah, one of the prerequisites of if you want to become inevitable, you have to have some humility, right? Because you are going to get kicked in the teeth. You're going to get told all sorts of things. But let's get into what the mindset of becoming inevitable, of becoming all that God made you to be looks like.
Well, I'd say to start with, and this is one of the things that Nick's always laughed at me for, but I will reference someone from my board of advisors, and that's my man Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
And Forrest Gump, he just kept running.
Yeah, he really did.
That's what he did. And you've got to be someone that quitting's just not on the table for you.
Right.
You just got to be someone who's like, well, ruined my business today. I'm just going to keep going.
Right.
Lost all my opportunities today. I'm just going to keep going. Spent the last 3 years working on this deal. Didn't get it. I'm just going to keep going.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people who are very successful, and I get to talk with some of them who worth hundreds of millions of dollars, bankrupt 10 times, bankrupt 12 times, bankrupt 15 times. How many times would you go bankrupt and keep going? For a lot of people, one is one too many.
Yeah.
Right. But when you're someone who knows that you're supposed to be great, that you can do it, they're all painful. And you learn lessons from those, and they change you when you learn those painful lessons. But you say, I have to keep going. I can't stop.
Right.
You have to be someone that quitting is never on the table for you.
Right. Your dad's so powerful when he talks about deciding and like what decide means. Like you just said, you have to decide that quitting is not an option for you. It literally means to cut off and remove. So it's like my marriage, there's no option for failure here or whatever it is. Like you're literally just, it's not even something that you think about after that point. It's like, well, that's literally off the table 100%. It sounds so simple, but I think in people's minds, they will revisit, they'll still allow themselves to play the scenario out. When you remove the option, the scenario isn't something that you even give any thought or energy towards.
And I'd say with that, just like a sub thought of quitting is not an option, is that you've got to keep a sober mind.
Right.
Because you can have that sober thought the same way that people in a sober mind say, I'm married to one woman.
Right.
And then they get drunk and do drugs and they break their vows.
Right.
And and I'm not saying you're not going to have tough times, but really the sobriety that I'm talking about is emotional sobriety.
Yeah. Very good.
And you've got to maintain a level of emotional sobriety, even in the toughest of circumstances, because that's where out of your, sad, frustrated, anger-based drunkenness,
Yeah.
you'll quit.
Yeah. Very good. So I mean, really, you're kind of you're alluding to your favorite $12 word that you've coined and people in your life know, which of course is equanimity. I mean, that's what you just described is that you can be unshaken. Can you go ahead and give
of
us,
an even mind?
yeah? Can you give us? You're never too high. You're never too low. As you say, no touchdown dances. And
No pity parties.
Right. Exactly. And it sounds great, right? Until you're actually in the throes of things.
Yeah.
And everything's pushing your buttons.
Drown to death calmly. That's equanimity.
Yeah. That may sound like hypothetical, except for you've seen people do that. And that's what I love about your time in the teams is you're like, no, that can happen.
It's possible.
Yeah, which is amazing. So the mindset, number one is quitting is not an option. Number two, you have equanimity and you're unshaken. What's number three, G?
You got to have a long-term time frame orientation.
Yeah.
And what this means is everyone, the same way when you go on a journey, like a physical journey, a geographical journey, you drive from Texas to Colorado, you're pointed somewhere.
Right.
And when you have that frame of reference, okay, hey, this is going to be a 14-hour drive, you prepare for that. You make situational decisions based upon the journey that you're on.
Yeah, very good.
Right? This isn't a 400-hour journey. It's also not a 30-minute journey.
Right.
Right? If it was a 30-minute journey, you'd make some different decisions. If it was a 400-hour journey, you'd make some different decisions. So where you're oriented towards going has a big impact on the decisions that you make. The same is true with the time frame that you're living on. When you live on a 1 month time frame or a 2 month time frame, and it's really easy to do this with your finances, especially if you're in a season of life where you haven't developed some stability and security, where you don't have months of income in the bank, where you're living paycheck to paycheck and bill to bill. It's very tough, and you're going to be short-term time frame oriented. You don't have to be, but most likely you're going to be. Long-term time frame orientation is where your life is pointed a long, long way down the road, and ideally all the way into eternity. And so the decisions that you make, they're not about, like when you're in high school, you make decisions based upon like, man, what's going to make me popular in the next 4 years?
Yeah.
Right. But if there's some kids in high school that they get really focused on college sports or a little bit further greatness, and they'll make different decisions.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go to the parties because I don't really care about that. I care about college sports. I'm looking 4 years down the road. I'm looking 6 years down the road. That's a different time frame orientation.
Yeah.
And if you'll have a long-term time frame orientation about the purpose of your life, about your success, you'll make very different decisions. And if you want to be inevitable, you're not going to be inevitable in the next 5 minutes.
Yep.
If you want to be inevitable, you've got to have a longer time frame orientation than everything that opposes you.
Very good.
Think about that. Think how many things are working against you. The different seasonality in the economy, your circumstances. I could go on and on, all the different things that could be happening around you that might be in a season working against you. And you've got to have a time frame orientation that outweighs all of them. Only when you have that can you be inevitable. And so when you're pointing your life in a much longer term distance, you're going to make very different decisions.
Yeah, that is so good. And I will tell you that most of what Garrett just describes happens in your brain in like a millisecond, because we automatically assign time frames to things all the time, not from a place of logic or from a place of research or sound thinking, just from mostly a place of desire. Like, man, I really want this.
And so based upon it, here's how you can measure, if you're not sure, what time frame do I live on? How quickly do you expect to get paid back for the things you're doing?
Very good.
Right, that's really the question of the time frame that you're on.
Yeah.
If you're on like a 5-minute time frame, you want people to reciprocate right away. If you're on an eternal time frame, you're saying, you know what, God may be the one who pays me back for this, right? Or you know what, I may never reap the fruit of this. My children will, maybe one day when I'm dead, or my grandchildren will reap the fruit of this. The time frame on which you expect to be paid back is the time frame orientation you live on.
You know why we said the prerequisite was humility? Was that right there. I find so much glory in the thought process that I would be willing, or any person would be willing, to pay a massive price for something that they'll never reap the benefit of. I think of Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, those people who just paid a great price, knowing that, hey, that what they saw, the land that they saw, wasn't for them. And I love that. But that takes humility.
If you remember the few months ago, the message I did, maybe we'll do it on the podcast sometime, but it was about the 3 tests that every man has to pass. And the third test, the hardest test, is a test that you don't get the reward from.
Right.
The hardest tests you have to pass as a man are the tests that don't benefit you.
Yeah. And that's why we said humility, because the opposite of humility is selfishness, right? That's you thinking about, well, I can see where the lines are going to line up for me. And anyways, we could go on about that.
So we've got the mindset.
Yes, we've got the mindset, and we're going to break down, because if you've been with us for a while, you may see a lot of what's underpinning these things. But we're going to give you the 3 characteristics, the 3 traits that you must have here in a second. I just want to highlight something, because we're talking about knowing that you're destined to be great. And I think it's easy to look at like, okay, Rocky, massive worldwide movie, I'm going to be the president, or I'm going to be a billionaire. I'm going to insert something that very few people ever experience.
I think, you want to talk about a great story, J.D. Vance,
Yeah. Well, yeah, amazing.
Comes from nowhere and makes it all the way to VP at 40 years old.
No kidding. Yeah, and we're releasing this on Inauguration Day for him and Trump, so it's a very worthwhile story.
Yeah, but what if you don't think that's you?
Right. Yeah. What if you don't think you're destined for greatness, and none of those things have gotten into? This episode is not like we'll throw it out, because our definition of great is what, G?
It's the Hebrew word rabah, right? Genesis, God says to be fruitful and multiply, right? And the word, this word that represents fruitful and multiply is the Hebrew word rabah, which means to become great or to multiply,
Right.
right? And it also talks about the description in the concordance talking about what does rabah mean. It also says to possess all, right? And so really greatness for your life is you just getting all of what God has for you.
Yes.
You're not trying to be somebody else.
You're right.
God made you. And Ephesians 2:10 says that God created you for good workmanship, right? There's special work. There's a unique destiny that God has put on your life. And anything less than greatness is less than what he created you for.
Right.
Greatness is for you to live up to your design.
Yeah.
Greatness is for you to have all of the destiny that God has for you.
Yeah. There's a great quote that says, comparison is the thief of joy, but I always add on that comparison is the thief of destiny as well. Because if you look across at somebody else and you decide like, oh man, I really like what they're doing, I'm going to start doing that too. You've literally just sacrificed what we talked about.
There's one thing that I can beat everybody in the world at.
Being Garrett Unkelbach.
That's being me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the same goes for me and for every single person out there listening. And I hope that you can take joy in that. We're going to get into why that is. One of the things I love about your story, G, and I know your story about as well as anybody that's not named Garrett Unkelbach, is I feel like if I could sum up your life, so often you knew who you were and you knew why you were in a place and you were the only one. Everyone else was like, well, what are you doing here? And you experienced that at various levels from, I'm going to put muscle on. No, you're not. You're the skinny guy. Oh, look what happened. You put the muscle on, right? And then we could go through. I mean, go listen to your story. I think it's somewhere in the 90s for episode numbers. If you haven't, I'll link to it in the show notes actually. But you tested this at the very highest level where you showed up to the SEAL teams and people told you like you got no chance, Uncle Bach. Over and over and over again, you heard it and you had a reply for them whenever they told you that. And it was this thought process. You want to tell that story because it's yours to tell.
You tell it. You're great at telling the story.
Well, I love it because I've heard you say it so many times that people would ask you like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Like, you're not going to be here. And you said, I don't know a lot, but I know I'll be here tomorrow. And what is that? What is that? That's a one step at a time. Like everybody's looking down the line going, can I make it through buds? They're looking at like, can I get to the finish line? And you're going, we got a race to run. And guess what? The next step is tomorrow. And when does tomorrow arrive? It never does. But I'll be here. So
I'm going to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yep. You had that endurance thought process. And I absolutely love that. I know where you get that from your dad because, when he says, we'll see, but I'll be here. That's what he's saying. I'll be here tomorrow. And so really take that on board. I told Garrett a story about my favorite sports team and one of the famous managers that I heard an interview once, Sir Alex Ferguson of Manchester United is one of the greatest managers of all time. And I remember they interviewed him and asked him about how he set goals for his team. And it was exactly what you said. I was expecting him to say like, hey, we're supposed to win the league this year. We're supposed to win this trophy or this trophy. And his simple response was, at this club, we're expected to win every single game. What a great thought process. I'm just going to show up and win today. And guess what? I'll be here tomorrow. I'm going to do the same thing. Great thought process. So, G, I want to get into the 3 traits of becoming inevitable.
We talked about this quote from Abraham Lincoln. I will prepare and my time will come. And I want to break down the different pieces of this quote into 3 keys that we're going to give you to becoming inevitable.
Yes.
Right? So I will prepare. That is a thought of, and we're going to talk about these more, but that's a thought of seed sowing. Right? I'm just going to sow seeds. I don't know when they're going to pop up. That's part of the time frame orientation deal. I'm going to put these seeds in the ground. If you got a short-term time frame orientation, you put seeds in the ground and then 5 minutes later you're like, "Man, come on.
Right.
Where's my fruit?"
Yeah.
Right? But I will prepare. This is a thought of seed sowing. And my time will come. My time. This is a thought of identity, right? I have a time. There is something that's here for me.
Yes.
Right. And so I know who I am, and I know that my identity demands a destiny. There's something that's here for me. Right. And your identity is attached to that. And then the last piece of this quote will come. Right. I will prepare and my time will come. The will come portion is a belief. Do you have remember what beliefs are? Things you know are true but can't prove. I can't prove it to you that my time's going to come, but I'm going to live that way.
Yeah.
This is what I know. I will get a chance. I will get an opportunity. And I know it's true. And I'm going to live my life based upon that fact. If you don't believe that, you'll be a poor seed sower. You'll be a poor preparer. You won't really know who you are. And if your time really ever does come, you won't be ready for it.
So good. So the three things in there were identity, belief, and sowing. And I want to get into them because they tie directly into the mindset that we gave to people beforehand. The very first...
So if you want, just to be clear, if you
Yes.
want to become inevitable, you got to have these three things. You got to have a strong sense of identity. You got to live on rock solid beliefs.
Yes.
And you got to be a seed sower.
Yeah. And we chose become inevitable for a reason because it was that story I told. If you're that good, like I said, that story I told about my band, what that guy said, I believe the cream rises to the top. If you're that good, at some point you will get where you're going because it's like, oh, you don't want me to? You're coming against me? These are all the things that I can't, telling me I can't do this? Well, I'm going to work so hard, so consistently for whatever time period that it takes, that at some point you're not going to be able to resist me. I'm going to bang the door down. You locked it? That's cool. I'm going to get a battering ram. Oh, you got a wall behind it? That's cool. I'm going to grab an excavator and I'm going to tear that thing down. It's a ridiculous thought process.
So really quick, I hadn't planned to tell this story. But I was just with my friend Joe Musselman recently, and we were telling some old stories. We were recapping from.
Love Joe.
There was somebody from the team was with us and saying like, "How did y'all get to know each other?" And so we started talking about the Honor Foundation. She goes, "Well, what's the Honor Foundation?" We're like, "Oh, let's tell you about that." Yeah. And so there's this really special night at the Honor Foundation called Story Night, and all these guys, I did it. Everyone did it. You tell your story, right, of who you are, of how you got here. And people tell a lot of different stories. About half the guys told their story of, how they made it to going through SEAL teams. And I can't tell you how many stories I heard from guys that really just had a great sense of inevitability. There was this one guy, he talked about, he'd been trying to get into the SEAL program for forever. He joined when I joined the Navy, you could just join and go straight to the SEAL teams. But before that, for a long time, you had to join the Navy, go get a job, and then once you'd been in the Navy for a few years, you could apply to go to the SEAL program.
Okay.
They only took people from the fleet. They didn't take people, straight from the outside. And this guy was stuck at a command where the chief didn't like him, and he kept trying to put in his package to go to SEAL training, and he says, "Oh, you'll never make it. There's no point in even putting a package in." He went through that for 3 years, and you know what he did?
Tell me.
He took his package, and he signed his chief's name on it, and he put it in.
Oh, dude.
And this guy was telling the story after 25 years in the SEAL teams, becoming a commander in the SEAL teams, went all the way to the top of the SEAL teams, and then he now consults for the agency. He's an incredible SEAL. If you're well known in the community, you might know who I'm talking about. But he just said, "I knew I was supposed to," and nothing could stop him.
I love that. What would have happened to him if that would have got bounced back to his commander?
He would have gotten in a lot of trouble. Well, he actually he could have gotten caught because it wasn't just signing his chief's name. The way that you put those packages in, it's like, well, your direct supervisor, then their supervisor, and then your supervisor's supervisor, and then your supervisor's supervisor, right? Like literally, like you get
everyone has to
get all of their signatures. And so his chief's signature was his supervisor's supervisor.
Right.
Right. And he went to two more people after that.
Right.
And said like, "Oh yeah, they already said, his leader did, but his chief wouldn't sign it."
Right.
He just forged his chief's signature and then went right on to number 3 and to number 4.
Man, I'm glad that worked out for him because it would have been a very different story. But I love that. Now, so when we go back to what we said about identity, belief, and sowing, there's a guy who has a strong sense of identity, a strong sense of belief. Here's what's challenging about this. You have probably a stronger sense of identity than anyone I've ever met, G. And we did a great coverage in Mindset Mastery this month, actually, on identity. By the way, we're covering purpose in February. If you don't know what Mindset Mastery is, go to theimpossible.life. If you're a person that struggled with why am I here? I feel like I'm not doing what I'm supposed to. Come be with us at least in February. I would always say to join us for the whole year, but come be with us in February. We're going to dive deep into purpose, and I'm excited about it. It's going to be a game changer as always. But going into identity, here's the challenge of that, G. You can't just be like, oh, cool, well, I'll just go grab a new identity. Can I get that on Amazon? Like, these are things that just in and of themselves take time to form. But identity is what will make you, what will keep you. It's what will sustain you, because the opposite of having a weak identity is that's what will make you quit or accept less. And I've seen this in you so many times when I've been like, well, hey, what if we just did this? And what I was suggesting was like, we could take something that's maybe on the table, but it's not what we wanted. And I've watched you over and over again be like, no, I'd rather not do it than do it for that. Because you had such a strong sense of like, this is who we are, this is what we're worth. And so I've watched that in you. And for so many other people, I think
and I'll tell you where that comes from.
Yeah.
When you compromise on your choices, you compromise your identity.
Right.
It's like compromise. And I'm not saying like I can't come to like a mutual agreement with people.
Yeah.
But some of these things, like the compromise is to lower your value.
Right.
Right. And when you make those kinds of compromises, it's like a form of quitting.
Right.
Right. The way we've
Very
talked
good.
about quitting here is that when you quit, well, you'll quit on anything else.
Yeah.
Right. If you quit on this thing, you'll quit on anything else that is as hard as that. And so when you compromise your value, what you're saying is, I'm only valuable until I get to this point, and then I'll lower it.
Right. And I love that you said that. And that's a challenging thought process. I almost wanted to hit the gun cocking thing because we got a new Gary Knucklebach quote. But like, your identity is, you can't fake the funk on your identity. It's going to be revealed as you pursue these things one way or the other. And you're going to find out if you have a shakeable one, or if you have one that's truly rock solid. And if you have one that's rock solid, when it comes time to quit, or when it comes time to compromise and accept less of your value or whatever it may be, like Garrett just described, you're going to say no, because you know. And that's your story so well, G. And like I said, I'll link to that in the show notes. So number 2 on here, belief, right? And your belief is so much of where you'll tie what you're doing today into that long term. It's that endurance, it's that time frame thought process.
And again, beliefs are the things that you know are true and can't prove.
Yeah.
Beliefs are a part of the infinite potential unlock.
Yeah.
God has a plan for your life, and you can have anything you want as long as you're willing to pay the price for it. Those are 2 beliefs for me that I've built my life on, and that's where my infinite potential has come from. That's the power of beliefs. Everyone lives on a belief.
Yeah.
You just got to know which beliefs you're living on. The belief, you may be living on a belief that I get what the world gives me.
Right.
You may be living on a belief that, I'm only as good as my parents said I was.
Right.
I don't know what beliefs you're living on, but your future is going to be determined by the beliefs that you have.
Yeah. And let me give you, I once again didn't plan on sharing this, but
and I want to say one other thing to this. Right. When I share my beliefs with other people, sometimes it's challenging for them, right? So much of my perspective is, I have a different perspective than other people.
Yeah.
And I'll say to, I'll say, hey, look, this is different than what you think. But I will challenge them with the thought process of, this is what my beliefs have done for me. This is what my perspectives have done for me, right? What are your your belief that, life is only based upon the things that you can see and touch. Your belief, whatever it is, how's that working for you? And if your beliefs aren't serving you well, then maybe you should consider some other beliefs.
Yeah. Man, I love that so much so, G. I was going to share about when we first started this podcast, we both had a belief that it was like, we were going somewhere with it. Not that we have longstanding selfish beliefs and our ambitions on this, but we just felt like God was with us and we wanted to help people out. And I remember one of the things you said from the get-go was, you said, we're going to have a very high standard for the guests that we have on. Like, we're not just going to pull like Joe Blow off the streets, or like, hey, I got a friend who, he would be fun. You were like, no, we're going to have very high standards for that. And I was kind of sitting there going, dude, I'm a marketer, so I've worked in this world of selling advertising and all sorts of things. I'm like, what are we going to entice these high level people with? We have, at this point, we have 87 listeners. Like, we're not going to get someone big. And then I watched over and over again, as I'm trying to think who our first guest was on here. I think it was Jason Poston was one of our first guests, who had 1 million followers on Instagram, who's a friend of ours. And then over and over again, you look at New York Times bestseller, World Series champion, and the list goes on and on. And all these different people that I would have been like, man, I don't know why these people are coming on here, but one way or another, because you had that standard and that belief of where we were going, like this, we were never meant to be playing small time, and you refused to accept anything less. And how much of that would it have been like, well, the easy compromising thought process would have been to shorten the time frame and been like, well, we'll get there one day, but we're not there now. But instead, it was like, no, this is where we're going. So we don't going to wait until we get to a certain point and then start having that standard. We're going to have it right now because the belief was there. And that was a practical thing for me that honestly I learned, and it's I think it's a good way of looking at anything that you're doing.
So you've got to have, I mean, really to become inevitable, you've got to have a belief that your time will come.
Yes, very
right?
good.
You've got to have a belief that all the seed you're sowing in the ground, God made you for a reason, and all the seed that you're sowing in the ground, whether it takes 1 year or 10 years or 40 years,
Yes.
God's going to bring it back to you. And if you don't believe that, eventually it'll get hard enough that you'll say, this isn't even worth it.
Yep.
This is so stupid. Why am I even doing this? When you have rock solid beliefs, everyone, it's like Noah building the ark.
Yeah.
And everyone's saying, you're a fool. Why
Yeah.
would you do this? He believed in God more than he believed in anyone else. And he built an ark that took him years to build.
Yeah. A great point. 75 years. Exactly.
Yeah. In spite of the constant ridicule, he built the ark.
Yeah.
And so that's the power of belief.
Well, and going back to what you said about Mel Fisher, who spent, who knows, like, what was it, decades looking for it?
It was about 18 years.
Yeah. Nuestra Senora de Atocha was the name of the boat.
The Atosha.
The
Right.
Atosha, right? Well, I say it correctly because it was a Spanish word. But anyways, yeah, and that's it. He had a belief, and there was no reason to fuel that belief other than a story that he had. But those kind of things get us moving. So going to what you said, you used the word multiple times. We've talked about identity. We've talked about beliefs. The third thing is sowing, and that's going to be your level of effort. Why? Because you realize that it's preparation.
Scripture says that God gives bread to the eater and seed to the sower. You could eat your seed, right? It's a poor use of seed, but you can eat seed. You can consume it. But seed is for sowing. You got to take these tiny little things, these little gifts of money, these little gifts of time, these little gifts of opportunity that you have, and you got to do the work to put them in the ground, water them, prepare them, and then let go of them. That's the hardest part of what a seed is. You know, for parents, your children are seeds.
Mm-hmm.
It's really what they are.
Very good.
God has given them to you for you to mature them. They don't belong to you. Remember the thought that God has no grandchildren.
Yeah. So
Right?
good.
When we get to heaven, it's not going to be like, oh, you're like the old guys, right? When we get to heaven, it's just going to be all of us as God's children, right? And with your children, they are a seed. And if you think that your job as a parent is just to protect your children, you're going to hold on to the seed for forever.
Yeah.
And you know
good.
what'll happen? Eventually, the seed resents you,
Hmm.
right? So don't think that's your only job as a parent.
Yeah.
You do protect them for a time. They're not ready to be planted right away. But eventually, you got to take the seed, you got to put it in the ground, and you scrape the dirt over it, and you bury it. You're going to let it die in there.
Yeah.
Until it sprouts and grows out as something else. You let go of it. You release it. You literally put a seed in the ground and say, God, it's up to you now.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's what it means to sow, and if you're someone who lives only by what you can control, you're not going to sow,
Right.
right? You're going to hold on to the seed, right? I don't know what'll happen if I do that. I'm uncomfortable with that. You can live your entire life that way, and you'll feel safe, but you won't reach your destiny until you begin to take risks. And living on what you believe, putting seed in the ground, that's taking a risk. To become inevitable, you got to be someone who knows exactly who you are. To become inevitable, you've got to be someone who believes that there's a great plan, that there's a great destiny for your life, who believes that God's going to do his part when you do your part. And to become inevitable, you've got to be someone who sows seed. You're sowing seed in yourself. You're sowing seed in other people. You're sowing seeds everywhere you go because you also don't know which seed is the best one.
Yes.
You don't know which ground is the best one. You're just going to be a seed sower. And if you'll be this type of person, eventually, one day you will come to a place and you will realize that your time has come and you are fully prepared for it.